I was reading about Buffett and reading that like when there's blood in the streets, it's the opportunity. In one day, I made as much as I made in a week. The next day, I made as much in a day as I made in a month. And I didn't have a ton of money. They could just pop. If I can optimize and spend this and do this, and if I invest that, it's like take your family out to freaking dinner for God's sakes and have a drink. Or you're going to find that stuff doesn't make you happy. Invest in experiences. It's easy to say, oh, I got to like look at that yield. It's 4%. And I'm like, what about the total return? Financial success is about three things. It's like how much you make, how much you save, and where you invest it. I say I always wish I knew about dividend stocks. I used to dismiss them a lot back then. I started researching 21 and I started learning about dividends because I was actually out of work. And I was like, it sure would be nice to have some of these dividend stocks everybody's talking about on Twitter. You can build wealth and have fun too. I am just the millionaire next door. People think I'm, full of what. Fine, that's cool. I'd rather them not think I have a ton of money. I'm cool. No need. This is me. This is my life. I'm comfortable with it.
Investors, welcome back to another go-round of Masters of the Market. This week, I'm incredibly excited. I have on with me Fabio Marciano, who is a true millionaire next door. I just had to get him on here with us to share his story. He also authored a book. We're going to get into all the details in a moment. Fabio, first and foremost, welcome to Masters of the Market, and I'll just jump right in here, toss the first question over to you. What the heck is your story, and how'd you get to where you are today?
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be on here. I can't wait to kind of just have a great chat with you and hopefully share some wisdom and help some folks out, avoid the mistakes that I made in my journey. The story, I'll give this quick story that folks probably want to hear, and maybe they'll see themselves in that story of mine coming out. I was obsessed with investing in the stock market pretty much since high school. Didn't really invest. It was a little bit different times back then. I'm 51. So back in the day, it was a little bit harder to invest than it is today. It costs a lot more money. The access to information wasn't at your fingertips on your phone, that kind of thing. Not to paint myself as a dinosaur, but it was just different times. Got the bug. Like I said, in high school, there was a stock market challenge in my junior year. I did pretty well with that. I can't even remember what stock I picked. It was me and my buddy. And I just remember buying the Wall Street Journal and poring over the stock charts and things like that, just to check out what should we invest in. And then from there, Peter Lynch was like my idol. Went up on Wall Street, read about that, and then kind of learned about Buffett a little bit later after college, to be honest. I went to school thinking I'd be a portfolio manager, picking stocks. Like literally, that's what I thought I would be. Didn't quite have the grades for that. Not that I'm a dummy, but not that kind of thing. Didn't get recruited from Fidelity, even though, I was going to school in Boston. So that was like a blow to the ego. So I kind of pivoted it into marketing instead. But all along the way, I made those mistakes that every college grad makes. You spend way too much money. You live on credit cards. You're going out every night. You're buying a round of drinks for you and your friends. You think you should have new clothes. And just spending money. Got into debt. And the wake-up call was when I was 25. I realized that after about 3-4 years of making good money and living at home. So like I didn't really have like rent. I was in debt still. And it kind of shocked me and kind of set me on that path of just living below my means. And at that same time, it was the dot-com bubble. So I had like, my net worth was all the way up here. I thought I was a stock market picking genius. Bubble burst and I went back to the drawing board, discovered Buffett, Graham, all of those kind of authors and investors, learn how to like pick stocks based on the actual businesses. And so just from there, lived below my means, invested the money, got lucky with a couple stock picks, things like that. And then basically I've been investing ever since. I like to tell people I've been investing since I was about 19. So about 31 years now.
So 31 years packed of experience. You said one thing right off the bat, Fabio, which was obsession. You had this obsession, you caught the bug. I'm curious where that bug for you may have come from, or like where that investing itch really started.
I remember it exactly. I wish I kept it. It was in a newspaper and it was this little blurb. It was USA Today. Don't know why I bought the newspaper. And it showed the investment in the Fidelity Magellan Fund versus like, if you put 10 grand into it, how much it would be worth over Peter Lynch's time frame. And I was just shocked. I remember telling my dad, like, look, stock market, we got to like invest in the stock market. I don't know how old I was. I just know that I didn't have access to a brokerage account or anything like that. He just kind of laughed and put me to the side. And he said, I prefer real estate. But that's, went to the bookstore, bought the Lynch book, and then that's how it happened. So it was just that one thing. And I that's why sometimes I don't get mad at some of these memes and things where people are like, oh, if you just invest $400 a month, at X% for 40 years, you'll be a millionaire. Because that's kind of what started it for me. Obviously, Lynch had outsized returns and it was it was like 10 to 15 years. But that's kind of what started it for me. It kind of clicked. Oh, if I invest in the market, I can have my money working for me while I'm sleeping.
Why don't you think all of us catch that itch? Like we again, like we're all going through the school systems. We all see, especially
Yeah.
today. I mean, everybody's got an Instagram, Facebook, whatever social media platform. We're all seeing these memes. Why aren't we all after it?
It's individualized. Like it's a product of your environment and like where you're growing up, who your access to a moment in time too. It could be a given year. So if we were to sit there and say 2020, right? Hey, oh, everybody's into the market. Everybody's at home getting stimulus checks and stuff and wanting to invest. The whole world is on lockdown. The markets are ripping. Great. Well, what about at the end of 2022? Imagine graduating college or something like that and trying to get into the stock market. You put in that $3,000 that you earned over the summer, hard earned, and now you like open your eyes, it's 1,500. Come late to the party in GameStop and AMC. Yeah. Oh, diamond hands. Maybe not so much. It's paper hands. Things like that, really impact you. And I remember in the psychology of money, Morgan Housel points that out. Like if you were born like during the 50s, it was not a great situation with the stock market. So you're like, oh, that's not great. If you're born in the 70s, well, boom, bust, that type of thing, all the way up until like Black Friday. So it really can depend on that, things like that, moments in time, like stock options, things of that nature. Robin Hood came up, into the play. Roaring Kitty is back, and that kind of flamed out recently. So again, I think it's just moments in time. And if you have a bad taste in your mouth from like that first experience, or you don't have somebody around you to kind of like guide you, like an uncle or an aunt or a father, son, mother, whatever, a parent figure that's been there, done that, that rich uncle, like I like pretend, oh, I want to be the rich uncle. You might not stick with it as
Sure.
much. You might not go, you know what? This $400 a month. I kind of want the new car instead of like, let's like YOLO, let's live for now, or you read the book Die with Zero and you're like, oh, I want to spend it now and enjoy life. It's like, that was written by a billionaire or a multi, hundred centenaire, Bill Perkins. Love the book, by the way. But it's things like that. It really depends. I got hit with it. I kind of went through a down period and then just realized like, you know what? I do like analyzing stocks. I love spreadsheets and stuff like that. Like, let's give it another go. So I got lucky. I had another turn at bat.
Before we get into your portfolio and where you're at today, I want to go back to when you first started because you shared that you jumped in a bunch of opportunities. It was the dot-com era. Sure, a lot of those plays were some fun tech plays.
Oh, it was great.
But then there was a moment it sounded like you pivoted into more of the Buffett stocks. Can you talk a little bit about where you started and then why you actually pivoted in a different direction?
It really came down to I caught the fever. I like to say I think it was the end of 98. I know specifically because I changed jobs. I invested in AOL, which was hot at that time. In one day, I made as much as I made in a week. The next day, I made as much in a day as I made in a month at my job. And I didn't have a ton of money. Like it just popped. I just remember it just ridiculous. And just sitting there looking, at my statement online and just going, wow, wait a minute. I can like just spend a little bit of money here and invest. And so then I got into all of those bubble stocks and things of that nature. I was invested in G and a couple of other like, stalwarts, et cetera. But it was those tech companies that I was like, this is nuts. And of course, March 9th or what 2000, whatever that was, or somewhere thereabouts where it started to pop and then it's down 50, 60, 70%. And every day it wasn't as fun to look at my balance. But what I was doing at that time, even though, it was like the depths of it, I was reading about Buffett and reading that like when there's blood in the streets, it's the opportunity and things bounce. Like it's up and to the left, it's just jagged. And so I'm like, all right, we're way down. You look at the Great Depression. All right, it didn't go anywhere for a couple of years, but then it popped. I said, you know what? 401k, I'm just going to keep kicking money in every month or every paycheck, and I'm going to invest in funds there. And then my personal brokerage account, throw a couple $100 in there and, do it right. And that's what I started doing is just trying to like analyze stocks, try to understand which ones like had an actual moat, that actually had numbers that made sense and weren't like viewed on eyeballs, valued on eyeballs or something like that.
Now, when you pivoted and you started going towards those, value opportunities, moat-worthy stocks, what at that point
Yeah.
in time did those stocks look like? And would you recommend that younger investors start with those types of stocks or go growth today?
For me, it's like I'm always like I'm not a financial planner. I'm just one guy in advice. I like people to have like a percentage in a different couple of buckets. I wrote a book, oh my God, it's 20 years ago called The Secrets of Wealth, and I just outlined how I did it, and built my wealth, and that was before I had wealth. Like it was one of those like imposter syndrome type stuff. But I was just sharing the journey that I was on. It could have been a blog, or a YouTube channel or podcast these days. But I call it my Vegas fund. I put 10% of my investable assets into like growth stocks. Like I was like, all right, to the moon with these. Let's see what's happening. It was like the internet, the businesses, the Amazons of the world, et cetera. And I rode those coattails of the boom in tech. And then others, it was index funds was the bulk of it. And then kind of a little bit more of those growth stocks slash older kind of, that it's like the business life cycle where it starts to mature a little bit. And I always wish I knew about dividend stocks. I used to dismiss them a lot back then, but it's a moment in time. And, back in about 21, I started researching 2020, 21, I started learning about dividends because I was actually out of work. And I was like, it sure would be nice to have some of these dividend stocks everybody's talking about on Twitter or X now. And so that kind of led me down a rabbit hole for over a year, really researching, reached out to a mentor of mine and kind of said, you know what, let me start dipping my toes into the dividend. And that becomes a portion of my investments. The growth is another, and then index funds is another as well. I think the key thing, sorry to keep going on this, everybody's individual is unique and there's a risk tolerance that you have. And you have to decide, hey, I'm okay with a little bit more less risk. That's bad grammar. I want less risk, but I'm going to get that dividend, and I like that kind of almost guarantee, although dividends aren't a guarantee, versus like a lot more risk, but now I get capital growth, and I'm gonna pop that money into my Roth IRA, and I'm gonna live tax free off that, and I'm gonna retire in 10 years. So it's that continuum of risk that you have to decide where do I sit on that. My personality, my sleep well at night kind of index is how I call it.
It seems like, at least from what I see, and then when I speak to others who are invested in the stock market, it seems to always come up. Figuring out risk tolerance is something that you need to kind of experiment with by getting
Yeah.
skin in the game. My question to you is there any way for investors to understand their level of risk tolerance before they even lose money?
It's definitely a hard one because for me, when I was riding high, part of like into 21, 22, I learned about options and covered call options. I'm like, oh, I could rent out my shares and make money. I had one bad call right before earnings. I was like in a meeting and I'm like, oh, I didn't do my covered calls for the week. And I made a play, like a play. I like to call it a play because it's like gambling on buying an option on Netflix. Didn't realize they were announcing earnings and it tanked. And I'm like, you know what? I'm not doing this, and I really haven't done a lot of the options market in a long time. I said I kind of am set. I'm not at that super wealth accumulation phase, and so where I thought I was higher risk, I wasn't. The whole game about simulation games and you can play with a paper portfolio, that ain't gonna do it. That's not real skin in the game. Yeah, I just think it's very hard to do. I was going to joke that you could take you and a couple of buddies go to Vegas and watch them gamble with a couple $100. Like, would you bet large on like black or red, at the roulette table, and see like your tolerance to lose a couple $100, and you can kind of say, okay, that's not for me. I like the slow and steady. All these games are rigged. There's an edge to the casino. I'm just going to lay out by the pool. You're
Sure.
probably an index investor. You know what I mean? Like it's just like a fun way of just going, you know what? A lot of times you hear great stories about people who make it a lot of time, but the reality is there's 99 other stories of people who didn't, that went bust. And so for me, I just always remember that it's the survivorship bias in the media where they like to talk about people who fired and are super happy and they don't have any kids and they're living in a trailer going around the country and stuff, but they don't, it's like, oh, by the way, they made twice the annual amount of money that the average person made. And like, they don't get into that. And I'm like, that's like an N of one, you know, for someone that is like me, that looks like me, that grew up like me, that has the same family values, etc. What are they doing? And so I try to find models and mentors that kind of I can look to and say, how are they doing that? And for me, it was a combination of Peter Lynch and Warren Buffett. I kind of just lumped those two guys together. And I still have that itch for those 100 baggers that Chris Mayer writes about. So I'll put a little seed money in my Vegas fund into a couple of cool stocks, but the bulk of it is in the S&P and some dividend stocks instead.
And right now,
Long-winded way of saying find your way.
and right now, if you had to ballpark it, what's the total value of your portfolio?
Oh, I never share that. It's multiples. And the only thing I do say is that I was a millionaire by 36, multi by 41, and I'm just keep growing from there with some dips and stuff like that. The reason I don't share it is I'm still in the workforce. I still have my relatives, etc. I don't want anybody treating me differently. I am just the millionaire next door. I'm cool with them saying that. That book was pivotal in my life, led me down that frugality tip. My wife makes fun of me, although I am a little addicted to running sneakers and books, investing books and stuff like that. I don't mind people knowing that I invest in dividends. I have a couple of shirts. My kids make fun of me and they always say like stonks and like dividends and like, oh, that type of thing.
Sure.
If people think I'm, full of, what, fine, that's cool. I'd rather them not think I have a ton of money. I drive a 15-year-old car. I think it turned 15 this year. My wife's like, you should get an upgrade. I'm like, I'm cool. No need, that type of thing. So this is me. This is my life. I'm comfortable with it. So that's the thing I want everybody to kind of realize, that like listen to the person speaking, see if they're speaking truth, that can kind of be backed up, that type of thing. Because the other piece about someone's net worth, a lot of times in the press, they don't talk about is how much money they earned. And so net worth isn't the greatest kind of gauge of if you're done well or not with your money invested. It's the percentage return that you've had over the course of your investing career is one. There's another thing called lifetime wealth ratio, which takes a look at how much you've made over your life, versus like how much you have now. And so the more, you can be over 100%. Great. That means like you're a good steward of your money. You took what you were made and you invested it. It's great for people to be like aspire like other people, but when they're so far away, that's a
Yeah.
problem. So it's just kind of like you'll get there. It takes a long time. Like, the rule of 72, where you figure out how long it's going to take me to double my money. If you use a standard percentage increase, it's going to take a while.
Look, one thing I love about your story, it really is a true millionaire next door type of story. Bare bones, what we all care about is hitting millionaire status, is eventually
Yes.
being able to retire comfortably and at ease. And I want to
Hmm.
ask you, just based on all your experience thus far and accumulating your wealth
Hmm.
and hitting the seven-figure mark and over,
Yeah.
what would you do differently today? And knowing everything that you know now, would you perhaps start with growth stocks or with dividend stocks? Would you go in more of a mixed bag? How would you start so we can all kind of, I don't want to say carbon copy, but
Yeah.
be on the path?
Yeah, yeah. For me, just a little bit of advice on the inputs, because like getting to like financial success is about three things. It's like how much you make, how much you save, and where you invest it. So your question is about how you invest it. So I never really talk about maximizing your income, but it's like if you job hop, if you invest in yourself. I went to school at night for my MBA because at that time that's what got me into marketing. It got me better paying opportunities, but I busted my ass. But I found like if you move jobs, you're going to get, you know, higher paying gigs. Then there's the spending. Like, how are you spending your money? How are you allocating it? Whether you use the 50, 30, 20, budgeting. 50% is for the needs, 20% invest, and 30% is for fun and your wants. Can you just live on less? The whole FIRE movement, like if that's about you and maximizing it, etc., you're gonna find that stuff doesn't make you happy. Invest in experiences, like things of that nature. So if my kids want something or we're out or we're doing something, like I want them to remember daddy was fun. He rarely said no, or said we have to choose or something along those lines. But hey, we went there, we did this, we had fun. Lastly, on your question, for me, I'm a growth guy at heart, and I know that it's just numbers. Like at the end of the day, like Monish Pabrai, I love as an investor too. Focused investors, Chris Mayer, Buffett, etc. They all had outsized percentage gains, yearly, and that's from investing in quality stocks, or businesses, not stocks, quality businesses, that had a chance to like be bigger. So for me, it's the growth side. Now, if you're sitting there, you're going like, it's a little too risky. I don't want to do so much in the investing and stuff like that. Great. Just do the index fund. Like now you can do like a dividend index fund and all that stuff. I'm not a huge fan of a lot of them because whenever there's a fund that is picked by humans, there's a chance of underperforming. And SCHD, others that people love because it's easy to say, oh, I gotta like look at that yield, it's 4%. And I'm like, what about the total return? Not just a year, not just three, not five. How about 10? How about 20 years? How long has that, fund been around and how are they performing? So I would tell people to look at that total return, both the price appreciation plus the dividends, and see where they net out on that front. And then if you wanted like oh this one's paying this dividend or that, or like I use the service and I want to look at it, I really advise people, and that's why I wrote the book, and that we didn't get into that, but like in my head on Twitter all day I was just seeing posts like, oh, I eat at McDonald's and it's paying me a dividend, I'm going to Costco and it's paying me money, AT&T 7% yield, all this stuff, and I was like, guys, you're investing in AT&T, like what? Like AT&T, that's the hot stock pick. And I'm like, look at the business versus the S&P. And then that's the whole thing. You could just buy the S&P and sell it, pieces of it over a year to get your dividend. And by
Sure.
the way, at that time, it was like a 2% yield anyway. So for me, I'm a growth guy. I still like my dividends. It's smaller than I would like, but my growth makes up for it. I'm more of the mindset of the guy who's going to do that 4%, start pulling. I've already started pulling some money out of my account to have some fun and things like that with the family. But I would say figure out your risk tolerance, what you want to accomplish. One of the guys that I interviewed for my book, John Boy, Canadian guy, loves Canadian stocks. His mentor, that's all he did. He invested, I think, in 7 Canadian stocks. He's up to 60 or 70,000 Canadian, I think, a year. And I think he's in his 40s. So if that's the route for you, maybe he underperformed from a total return. He doesn't care. His dividends, pay for an expensive, you know, steak dinner every week. So again, find what works for you. Listen to guys like me. Listen to gals, other people. Investors of all walks of life, and say, you know what? I kind of like what he's saying. I kind of like the mix. I kind of want to play. I'm going to put money into 3 different accounts and I'm going to see what works best and what keeps me up at night. It's like, oh, I bought options in that thing and that was stupid. Or like, oh my God, I fell in for that GameStop thing. All right, cool. You're not like a meme stock investor, or Bitcoin, etc. Maybe you're sitting there going, you know what? Costco sounds good to me. I like that $1.50 hot dog. Let me just invest in that. Or you're like, hey, Microsoft pays a dividend. That's interesting. How big has it grown every single year? Wow, they keep racking that up. I'm cool. Oh, look at the yield on cost from that investment, not the dividend yield, because I bought it 10 years ago, and that's like Buffett. Coke stock is paying him like a 50 or 60% dividend. I mean, yes, he bought it in the 80s, but that's the kind of thinking that gets swept under the rug because people just look at the vanity metrics of today versus saying, is it a sound company? What's the return on invested capital? Things like that. And with the apps and tools that are free and available at your fingertips, it's so easy to analyze a stock these days. That's what I would tell people to do. Learn how to analyze the stock. If you're not up for that, just go for an index fund. If you still want to do the dividend side, fine, dip your toes in it, but then don't come blaming guys like me for we warned you to learn how to do it the right way.
What I caught on that in the very beginning For sure. I want to go back to, which I think is really important, is
Sure.
you actually mentioned a couple of the steps before you even get invested. And I always joke that a lot of investors, especially across YouTube, you look in comments, everyone who wants to get rich by what I always like to say by Tuesday, right? We want to be a
Yes.
millionaire tomorrow. We don't have the patience. We want it now. When it comes to your process and actually picking a business, because you even mentioned that earlier, you said not a stock. Don't pick a stock, pick a
Yeah, business.
business. Can you touch upon that a little bit more for us?
Sure. And I listed, I always have the cheat sheet because I must have ADD. I'm all over the place and stuff like that. It's a simple process. So let's say I'm an X and someone is talking about a stock that I never heard of. I go to Stock Master. It's just an app, and I punch it in, and then I quickly say, okay, what does it do? How's it doing versus year to date or the latest 5 years versus the S&P? That's all I do. Oh, dividend yields. It tells me, okay, cool. I go to Seeking Alpha. I put it into one of my free portfolios just to analyze the stock. And then I go, what's the total return? Year to date, 1 year, et cetera. I'm like, oh, this is pretty interesting. And then I could click on a couple of the different tabs and it's like, oh, return on invested capital. Is it cool? And there's certain benchmarks that I like to hit. And so that's kind of how I will do it. I'll do the first part where it's like, is it actually outperforming the market? Yes or no? There's a summary tab. What does it do for a living, if you will? And that's how it starts. And I look at the business. I look, there's about 21, 22 different questions that I ask and metrics that I can look at. And that sounds complicated. But I can quickly, I think it's finviz.com. You just punch in the ticker and it gives you all the metrics and you can kind of say, hey, does this make sense or not? And that's it. That's the process. What's the company? Is it a good business? What's the dividend analysis? Like payout ratio? Have they increased dividends? What's the yields? Things like that. A price analysis, it's the PE ratio, PEG ratio, price to earnings growth, stuff like that. And then trend analysis, like over time, like is it up or down or how's it going? Is it a lot of insider investors? Like do management have a stake in that company? So it's things like that that I just take a look at. And to analyze the stock, I don't want to exaggerate, but it's probably under 15 minutes. Like if I did all those questions, because again, technology today is so super easy to just, hit a couple buttons and you're done. Versus,
Sure.
oh, on X, someone is buying this and I kind of like their stock picks and they say they've had a 20% return for the past 10 years. Maybe I should buy it too. I used to do that. I lost a lot of money doing that. I don't do that anymore. This is my family's money. Like I have to know if it's a good business or not before I put any money into it. And then I'll seed it. I'll, a couple $100, throw it in there. So now it's in my actual portfolio. And so I'll see, and then I can see, oh, that's up. Oh, how's that doing? And then you can put a little bit more skin in the game.
Sure. And talking about your portfolio, what are some of the top,
Yeah.
2, 3 positions that you have in there that you are most excited about or that you have high conviction on?
You're gonna get me bored because I haven't added to a ton of them. I'll say I have SPY and QQQ. A lot of my portfolio is there. I have Apple and Amazon from back in the day. Not really selling those stocks. Microsoft still bullish on that as well. Nucor, Costco. There's some. Oh my God, I'm blanking on a couple of oil stocks. I know they're out of favor, but they pay dividends. And yes, we're gonna go to electric over time. Still figuring out the AI space. Got a lot of friends that are engineers and kind of guiding me on that space. A little bit of money in open AI and NVIDIA prior to the pop. So I'm very happy I made that investment a couple of years ago. I'm still watching Lemonade and Ally Bank, just because I think the disruption is where I'm at from that tech side, where you're minimizing the operating costs of the business. So they're pretty smart on that front. I saw a presentation by the Ally Bank marketing leader, and I was like, wow, this is impressive what they're trying to do. And so that kind of, got me onto that stake. So it's there, but again, the bulk of it are things that I've held. My God, it's some 25 years. I've held some of my shares. So and that's how it works. If you are blessed with a little bit of luck, a little bit of hard work finding some of these and you hold on to them, you get your 100 bagger plus pretty quickly. And I love, again, I've mentioned that several times, but that book will kind of open your eyes to how you should analyze stocks.
And how many positions right now are in your portfolio?
I knew you were going to ask that. I was like driving this morning, running errands, and I'm like, he's probably going to ask me how many I have. I'd say about 25. The concentration of the wealth is probably in 10 whether it's a fund or an actual position. I have a couple, I call them like my little feeder or seeder testers, where it's like a couple bucks here, a couple thousand, where you're just like, all right, I think there's something here. And I know if you invest a couple of grand into a stock and it becomes a 100 bagger, it's amazing how much money that becomes. So I've got a couple of those that are a little bit more of the riskier ones, and then my dividend ones are just set on dividend reinvestment. It's like on autopilot. I look every month. I close the books and I readjust all the cost bases because I'm a little bit of a spreadsheet nerd and make it a little bit of a game. I'm at that point where I'm not trying to risk beating the market and that type of thing. I would love it every year if I could, but it's about capital preservation and actually living a life outside the spreadsheet right now for me.
Sure. I love that. Living the life outside the spreadsheet.
Yeah, Ramit Sethi. It's not me who said it. I think he was the first, but it's and that also applies to like the FIRE movement and frugal boys and girls who are like, if I can optimize and spend this and do this, and if I invest that, it's like take your family out to freaking dinner for God's sakes and have a drink, and have some fun and order dessert. They don't need to remember that mom and dad were like so penny pinchers and never had fun. You can build wealth and have fun too.
Powerful because I've
Yeah,
interviewed so many people, and a lot of them who are in your position actually say the exact same thing, especially when we get into the topic of conversation of how much is too much. Now, just before I tap into a little bit more of fire talk, I want to
sure.
ask you about the size of the portfolio because I'm always transparent about this. I think one
Yeah,
of my biggest mistakes in 2020 actually is when it happened, all these dividend stocks were on sale and I
right.
loaded the boat on a lot of them only to then 2, 3 years later, I'm still in the position now to be trimming. And I want to get your take on how much is too much. Is there such thing?
Yeah, it's because you can't keep track of all 50, 60. And I always like I wrote about it, it's like like Buffett says you have a punch card. You can get unlimited at bats, you're not going to strike out. You can wait for the fat pitch, if you will. You can't know the businesses of 50 companies. Like it's just like almost impossible and have a social life and personal career and take care of your health and have some fun and be like, oh my God, because like every single day there's news that's either going to like cause you not to sleep or be euphoric about one of those stocks and one of those businesses. And so for me, I'd like to say like 20 is like a nice good number for folks. A lot of the folks that I mentioned as like the top investors, and I know in 100 baggers he showed it too. They're concentrated. Like most of their wealth, like even Buffett, it's in like 5 stocks or 4 stocks. And so like they have a high conviction rate. But if that causes you not to sleep well at night, you can be pretty diversified with even 10 stocks. And for me, it's like um I've done that too. Like during 2020 and 21, I started adding a bunch and I think I got to 35 or something like that. And then I was like, why do I own this? And I'd look at it and go, I'm gonna sell that, even take a like a capital hit, gain stack. I'm gonna put them in something else that I have a higher conviction about. And so that's like the thing. It's like I'm gonna build my all-star team. And it was like in my book, Dividend Millionaire, I call it like Moneyball for stocks. It's like, all right, I'm just gonna find those under appreciated assets, and then I'm gonna start investing in them now. Which ones do I have higher conviction for, etc. I'm not like Monish Paprai and some of these that can sit there for a couple of years and just be like, I'm gonna prove the market wrong, and it's flatlining. I like to see growth too. So I'll keep those small, but then I'll just okay, you know what? Screw that dividend stock. I'm just gonna put in the S&P. Screw that stock and I'm putting QQQ. Or screw that, I'll put it in a dividend ETF. And so that's where I did trim it down at the beginning of 23. I pulled the plug and I started selling a bunch of these things, took a little bit of a tax hit. But I just think you need to be able to like know the story of the company and be able to like just how's it doing? And for me, that's around 20. I think most people, you just, and that doesn't mean like my portfolio on Seeking Alpha I think it's like 50 stocks that I'm watching, occasionally. I'll get alerts and things like that. Every quarter or every, twice a year, I'll download a spreadsheet that analyzes the performance, and I could sort it by a bunch of metrics and go, oh, I'm shocked that one popped and I didn't realize that. It's rare that it's like an Nvidia pop within a year and it's several 100% that you missed the boat. You're gonna miss the boat by 5%. And it's
Sure.
like, if I don't have that stress of like worrying, and I can go live my life, and then okay, I'm 6 months later late to the party. It's like, okay, great. You bought Apple right when the iPhone came out, or you bought it 6 months later, or a year later, or 2 years later, you still made out like a bandit. So that's the mindset I always have. It's the Apple example that I use, is like, okay, you missed the boat, when the iPhone came out, or right before it, or iTunes. You could be late to the party and still have a multi-bagger, no problem, or a great dividend yield. It's like, oh, darn it, they had a one-time special dividend. I owned it and everything. It's like, get the next one. Like, it's like, there's always a great business opportunity, buying opportunity. It's just know what you can manage and hold. And for me, that's around 20.
No, I love that because really what I heard from that was, again, don't invest into the stock, invest into the company and find great companies.
100%.
It's the point that you really keep circling back to. How do you define a great company?
Yeah, I wish I was as articulate and like I'm a more of a writer than on the spot. But for me, it's a company that has a moat. It's a company that has like a durable advantage, competitive advantage versus the marketplace. It's one run by competent managers, that put the interests of the shareholders and the consumers front and center, and that kind of drives everything. Where they're fiscally responsible, and reinvesting into the businesses. And like for one today, it's hard for me to just jump in. I just know like the legacy examples of like Amazon and Jeff Bezos focusing on free cash flow and understanding that's a core metric. And for us, as long as we're delighting the customer, it's the flywheel from good to great with Jim Collins, that Jim Collins wrote. We're going to take care of the customers. We're going to have low prices. We're going to attract third-party resellers. They're going to come onto the platform, going to allow us to like ship more products. Prime is a great thing. You'd be crazy not to have that, and it's just well run. So for me, it's like the managers are all on the same page, fiscally responsible, taking out cash flow. I like to see a great return on invested capital, ROIC, a nice high one, and then just a period of kind of great fiscal results. And then how do they react in tough times? And that's it. Like hopefully it's got a. I'm a brand guy, so like obviously that's my day job. So I like to talk about that as a great moat too, which is hard in some industries for sure, but that's I'll take a great brand that's taking care of their customers, that are loyal, any day over some like hyped up meme stock, that's going to be gone in a hot minute.
Now, you spoke a lot about management just now, and I'm curious from your standpoint, how do we, the average Joes, the retail investors out here, get to know management? Because obviously we can't, like some of the hedge funds, right, or the big
Right.
time investors can't just call them up. How can we get to know if a manager or the management team or the leadership in one of these companies, in one of these baggers, is actually a good team?
Yeah. Yeah, for me, the best way, it's a boring way, it's the earnings transcripts, or listening in live. Seeking Alpha is just the tool I use, but you can go on there and you can scan the transcript just to see what they're saying. Are they dodging any questions? Um, and then you can go back to earn like each quarterly one and say, are they saying the same thing? You could read the annual letter and say, okay, well, what are they prioritizing here versus like, what are they saying? And does it sound like it's making sense? Podcasts, if I'm interested in a company, I literally go onto like Apple Podcasts and I type in the name of it or the CEO's name and like, oh, let me hear an interview. Because it's easy to fake it in a couple of sound bites or an investor letter or earnings call. But over the course of 30 to 60 minutes of an interview and hard interviews, and I'm not talking like a CNBC puff piece for 8 minutes or 5 minutes, you can like understand, okay, this person, do they have it? I'll look at track record. Like sometimes like, oh, they just hired such and such from this company or such and such from that company. And you're like, okay, well, that was well run. Hopefully they learned their lessons and they're going to come on over and shake things up. So it's just things like that, like actually hearing them speak. And then sometimes it's like, I do it by proxy. It's like, like where did they come from? Where were they trained? And like, back in the day, I worked at Unilever. If you worked at Unilever or P&G or some of the other companies, you're trained a certain way. And so if you made your way up to director, VP, etc., you're a solid manager, general manager, and you're gonna run a business a certain way. And you can see it, and the performance is there. So you want a good operator, I think it's the book The Outsiders by Thorndike is a great book. If anybody wants to read that, that's about great operators and how they think. And that also talks about being great capital allocators. So it's a good read.
Now, every now and then, I mean, inevitably, sometimes we get a loser in the portfolio. We got to sell. How do you
Yeah.
know when it's time to sell? What red flags go up for you? And how do you safely call it quits and not look back? Because even when you first started sharing your story, you had a lot of
Yeah.
lessons that were learned. And not once did I hear you say, I regret doing X, Y, or Z. It was more like I learned these lessons, I moved on.
Yeah, I was fortunate again, like I was just starting my journey and the dot-com bust happened after a couple of years. So I wasn't burned too badly. I didn't have as much to lose, that type of thing. And it was hard. Today, the way I look at it, I try not to hold on to things. I try to be a little bit unemotional about things. I might say like it might be cheesy, but like, thank you so much for your outsized returns in my portfolio, whether it's 100%, 200% gains or something like that. But I'm having a little bit of trouble, really thinking that you're going to straighten this out for the next 5 or 6 years. So I might trim my position. I'll hold on to a little bit of it, that type of thing. One of my dividend stocks, I'll just say it was a bummer. It was San Juan Royalty Trust, like SJT, and it was gangbusters for me during during COVID. Invested in it. I think it was up 70% for me. Great, like a ridiculous dividend yield. It's like one of those things I knew about royalty trusts, a little bit of volatility, et cetera. If you look it up, you're like, oh, I know where he sold. I sold a little too late because I'm like, oh, my baby's gonna come back, et cetera, like that. It became quickly a huge part of my dividend portfolio, like the actual cash payments out. And so then finally I was like, you know what, sir, thank you for the run. I'm going to sell you at a profit. I'm going to move on. I'll keep like a share or two so I know the good times. And if I'm stupid for selling you, and I look at it still in my portfolio, but I've invested that money elsewhere and made more money out of it. So like you just have to, at a certain point, move on. And the hardest thing for me is going to be some of those 25-year holdings and stuff like that have taken care of me and are going to take care of my kids, to sit there and say, you know what, you're at that business maturity where you're in decline. It's time to move on. And sometimes that's hard to do, because your cost base is so low, and you might have tax implications, et cetera. It's easier if you're in a tax deferred account. Like it's just easy to just hit sell. You don't have to worry about paying taxes and like having a 20 to 30% haircut just because of Uncle Sam or whatever tax authority where you live.
So let's get into some of these tax deferred accounts because the game of taxes is always fun. And one of the
Yeah.
core, I think, winning strategies is definitely to make sure you're utilizing your tax efficient accounts.
Mhm.
Should younger investors load the boat on their 401ks? I've also had people on here that shared, why would I go with the 401k or the Roth or the IRAs? Because I want to retire, at 30 or
Sure.
35 and not, the ripe old age in the 60s. How would
Yeah.
you play it?
I don't have the numbers in front of me. But I'll say one thing probably about the people who kind of, look down on a 401k or that kind of thing where you're deferring the tax payment. Those people probably make a lot of money a year. They probably make a ton of money. And for them, getting $6,000 or $7,000 and being able to put it into a Roth IRA is probably not a big stretch. They're not the single parent or someone who's not making a ton of money, where coming up with 6 grand, 7 grand to invest is a difficult thing. They might not have the debt, etc. So those folks usually are unable to put themselves in someone else's shoes. When I wrote my book, The Secrets of Wealth, 20 years ago, I actually said it was stupid not to take advantage of a 401k because essentially it's $1 I put in versus 72 cents at that time after taxes. So you need to like grow whatever that math ends up being, like 40% just to get back to the dollar. I go, that's stupid. That dollar now grows. So if you look at it on a pure math basis, and I think Money with Katie, I'm forgetting her last name, did the analysis, and I think the tax deferred came out slightly ahead. And what I like to say to everybody is, it depends. If you're anti 401k guy or gal, fine, don't do it. Go Roth IRA 100%, invest in your HSA, and then go online and tell everybody else they're stupid. I like to say, okay, do the math, see what you can afford. Someone who actually cannot afford to max out a 401k, deferring that money to grow every single year, you're gonna end up ahead. Like, it's just math. If you have the same investments and they're growing the same amount, you're put in more at the start, you'll never catch up. And it's the law of big numbers and small numbers. You have a bigger number because it was tax deferred, it's going to grow faster, right? What do they say? Oh, you don't know what the tax rates are going to be 20 years from now. Oh, you don't know, like, Uncle Sam's going to change their mind, etc. Like, I want to retire faster. It's like, okay, great. You could always change your mind, but that tax grew, it grew. You could do a Roth, ladder. You can like sell every so often or put it into a Roth and pay the taxes a couple of years from now when it grew. Or you say, you know what, Fabio, you're the dumbest guy in the world. I'm just going to go 100% Roth. Congratulations. All I care about is you're investing, and you're doing it from a knowledge base and not just following some yahoos online and behind anonymous accounts or someone whose financial situation doesn't really look like yours. Make an educated guess. You could do both. You know what I mean? Like, you can sit there, I've got my company 401k, but I'm going to have a little bit of a Roth. You can do a Roth 401k. It's easy too. You can just I'm going to do 50-50. All right, let me sit on both sides of the fence on the seesaw and see what happens. So I don't know. For me, like, over the years, again, I'm at a certain point, most of my money is going to a Roth 401k. Like, that's just the way I'm playing it now. But I think if you're just starting out, like, putting away a lot of money at the start is key. If you're a fire boy or girl, all right, maybe then you go Roth. Maybe you go like HSA, eat your ramen noodles and live out of your car and stuff like that, or a low cost living area. And more power to you. It's all cool. It's like, you do you. I'm gonna do me. I did my way. When I started, the Roth was only a couple of years old, so I really didn't understand it and know it. So I just went the 401k route, and it turned out okay.
You said it all worked out regardless.
Yeah, like, again, because you can look at any endless amount of scenarios. It's like, oh, what if the government, with the debt, et cetera, they're going to have to go after, higher taxes, et cetera. What if they change the law and they go after Roth IRAs? Like, and now they say, oh, no, but if you're over a certain limit, if you have $1 million in your Roth before a certain date, we're going to have a 10% withdrawal tax to fund the, like, Social Security. Like, you don't know. Like, again, yes, over time they're gonna, like, look for the money and they gotta, pay off the debt and do all that other stuff. But they could easily you can make up any number of scenarios. And I get where they're coming from. It's a good, smart, logical place. I'm just talking about the folks that are working two jobs, that type of thing. They're not making a ton of money. Tax deferred allows them to put a lot more money away for that same dollar earned. And that's the key for me with that particular scenario.
Sure. It's almost never leave a dollar on the table.
100%. 100%. I don't want to keep talking about this unless you want me to. Like, I'm gonna get in trouble, and, like, in the comments, people always feel like this guy's an idiot. But I just, like, just talk to someone who's, like, barely making ends meet, is working, a minimum wage job, and just be like, hey, you want to start a Roth IRA so you can be a millionaire? And it's like, all right, just put $500 away a month. And they're like, I don't have that amount, but I have this. And it's like, okay, start there. And I just believe in a tax deferred environment, for them, it's probably a little bit better of an option.
So I want to throw this question out to you because I actually get it quite a lot. And actually, just the other week, I got an email from someone who had this question. He is in
Mm-hmm.
his elder 50s and he's got a timeline for himself of about 10 years. He's got only 150 to $200,000 to work with, and he just got let go. Now, if you're in his position, what would you recommend, someone nearing retirement who really is not in the position to even think about retiring right now? They
Yeah.
haven't even really gotten invested in the stock market. Where would you recommend they start? How they go about their investment game?
Yeah. Yeah. With that particular individual, a little scary too, right? You just said, like, lost your job and stuff. So you got to, like, do I have an emergency fund? So you've got 100, 150K. Where is that money? I'll probably say without any other further questions, just put in a high yield savings account in this day and age. The percentage that you'll get, you can always make a decision later. Rash decisions when you're highly emotional is not the way to go. Because like I just look at the Schiller PE ratio, we're pretty high. And so that's like bubbly, to use that term. So you could be a downturn. Now you tell this guy, go put it into like a dividend ETF or put it in the SPY, and now it's down 20%, and he doesn't have a job. Does he have an emergency fund? Does he have any debt? How much does he owe on his house? Does he have a spouse? Is he taking care of kids? Does he have any medical? Like, so it's the full financial picture. But if like you're gonna ask me, it's like, okay, granted, let's say everything is perfectly fine, etc. Yeah, like and here's the other thing. Generally, they're going to say lump sum investing is the way to go because 3 out of 4 years this market is up, blah blah blah. What if it's the fourth year and that's only money you have? And so for me, sleep well at night, just put in a high yield saving account, get another job ASAP. You already have an emergency fund. Start to dip your toes into the water. Maybe you take 10 grand of it and you put it into a dividend fund, or you put 1,000 into like 10 dividend stocks that you like, and you just start that ball rolling, and you write this down. Like, here's my plan for the year. I will not invest that until I have a job. I will, and you
Sure.
just do it over time, because it's the panic of, oh my God, I only have 10 years to go for this. You don't know what could happen, like what other job they'll have, et cetera, and that type of thing. But it's the job stability first, sleep well at night. And I think I'd be pretty scared if this guy is just starting out, he saved all this money, puts it into market, doesn't have a job, and tomorrow somebody's talking about the Fed funds rate, not they're not going to drop rates, and it tanks, and he's sitting there like, now it's 90 grand. I'd rather him take care of his financial foundation first before growing what his base.
Now, a lot of people come at this with going for, monthly dividend stocks because they're going to go get that monthly income. What would you
Yeah.
say for those investors who are all over YouTube saying, need to get the dividend stocks on a monthly basis? That's what's going to pay me my income. I'm going to live off the dividends as fast as I can. Is that a real
Mhm.
strategy to put forth?
Personally, on the surface, no. If it makes you happy and you get to talk about it online or in a forum or Reddit or somewhere, great. For me, at the end of the day, it's, you said it, total return. How's it doing? Sorry, I picked three great stocks and they happen to pay out March, July. You know what I mean? Like every third month. And it's like, that's my portfolio. It's like every third month, it's like a huge spike in dividends. And then everything else is smaller. I average it out over the year. Here's the thing, guys and gals. You can take that big dividend paycheck in March and not spend it all. And then you just have a budget, and then that money just sits in your account if you're actually withdrawing it. Because that's the other thing, it's just paper. Like, if you're reinvesting your dividends and it's in a tax deferred account or something, or even if it's a brokerage account, but you're just paying the taxes out of pocket and letting that stuff compound, you're not spending it, so it doesn't matter. Me, I haven't done it yet. My plan is, like they say, to have about 2 years of expenses in cash down the road when I'm retired, so that I don't have to worry what the market is doing. Because generally after 2 years, it'll recover. So I won't sit there and be like, oh, I'm going to have to sell my assets during a downturn, all that other. It'd be like, I'm just going to pull from the cash, and I'll just keep getting compounding, etc. Um, Anybody who's trying to do the monthly thing, it's probably for the way it's on paper versus being able to say, hey, I got a quarterly bonus, like at a job. Every quarter I get a bonus, and that extra money has to last till the next one. That's how you do monthly. Like, you just have the money set aside in your cash account and you live off of it.
What's your take on dividend yields? A lot of us are
Um,
after, yields above, I don't know, 9%, 10%. It's all
9%.
about the dividend yield.
Yeah, it's yield traps for most unless it's a specific to like that particular industry or something where it's like they just pay it out. Pick an industry, maybe it's a BDC or it's these types of companies, like the Royalty Trust had a higher one that I got burned on. So I personally like to say, like, just be really wary of it. Look at the history of payments. Look at like the percentage of free cash flow that's being paid out as dividends, because if it's too high, I like to be in that 40 to 50 range or less. You've got a lot of these aristocrats and other kind of companies that are like they don't want to interrupt it, and they're just paying out 50 to 60% of their earnings as dividends and not reinvesting in the business and things of that nature. And they're just susceptible to competitive pressures and forces. And I'd rather invest in something that's a little bit more solid, if you will.
Sure.
Yeah, 60 payout ratios less than 60 is what I usually look for.
Got a few more questions for you, and I'm
Yeah.
excited about the last few here. I want to get into macros a little bit because you talked a lot
Oh
about
boy.
throughout the throughout our chat, right? This span of time just being invested, the market will recover eventually and be in the game for the
Mhm.
long term. What's your take on macroeconomics? Do you factor in macroeconomics? Do you think they matter?
Two things. I kind of stopped listening to like CNBC and stock like just prognosticators and things like that. You can make money in high interest environments and low interest environments and things of that nature. Some of the best companies have been started in recessions and things of that nature. I actually don't listen a ton to the macro. I do worry about the high rates that we have now. There's a lot of people living on credit, and the bill is going to come due soon because the rate of inflation is outpacing their wage growth. So that is a little bit, that's about as high as I go, just kind of like just understanding. I'll look at like car loan defaults and things like that if it comes up and I hear it. I'm just a little worried about the consumer right now. And that's the extent. And then I'll like, okay, is that business that I'm about to invest in, is it a consumer driven one? Or is it like something that's powering a lot of other companies, like the picks and shovels of an industry? So then that's how I'll do it. Nick Majuli, his book Just Keep Buying, and then Warren Buffett is like, even if Alan Greenspan whispered what he was about to do for the next 2 years of my year, I would ignore it. I'm not a Buffett, but it's true. You never know. Like it's like, oh, the yield curve inverted. Oh my God, or it's back to normal. And then all of a sudden it diverges. There are things where it's like, okay, if this happens often, then you got to worry about that. I mentioned the Schiller PE ratio, but that's a different type of thing. That's like, okay, how things are priced from a historical standpoint. The pricing is getting ahead of the earnings because a stock should be driven by the business earnings over time and the growth of it, not like hype. And it's like, oh, it's a new economy. It's like price to sales is more important. And it's like, okay, well, you're just trying to justify the market cap and the price for that product. I like to like, okay, those are the types of macro things that I look at, the pricing of the market. And there, do I go crazy? No, I'll take on the chin on tax deferred accounts. Maybe I'll pull some money out, put it into cash. I try not to time the market. I've done it really well one cycle. I didn't do it well the other. It was like the market ripped, and I was like, all right, let's go back in. But we're talking like 10% of the portfolio that I'm playing with.
Sure. Looking back over the span of the last 31 years worth of the millionaire next door experience, what has been one of your biggest mistakes that if you were to correct it, go back in time and correct it, would have set you up for more success today?
It's a fun. I'll just say the funny one, and then you can follow up with it. There was a period of my time, right when we got married. We didn't have kids for a while. I was trying to do this whole writing books and ebooks prior to Kindle, and trying to make money that way. Like to be an internet marketer, etc. I spent a lot of money on conferences, software tools, things of that nature, websites, all that money. If I would have just put, let's call it that 30K or 40K, whatever it was a lot of money over 10 years. If I would have just put it into my top picks, you probably we wouldn't be having this conversation. That's how much that 10 to 50K would have grown. We're talking multiple hundred baggers. And so it's just the point of like, know your circle of competence is what I would tell someone. Try it for, everybody can be an influencer, try out that type of thing, but know that is it actually ROI positive or is it a hobby? So that's actually like the biggest mistake I had was trying to do that thing instead of like doubling down on what was working. That was number one. Number two was in related to your question. I should have left the company I was with a number of years earlier to go to a place I might have been valued more and use my brain more and impact a lot more of my coworkers and peers and get paid a lot more. So it's the macro on that side of things I would have done a lot more on. And then from a stock standpoint, Yeah, I wish I discovered a couple of dividend stocks a little bit earlier and just started that Cedar fund because then it would be a little bit more, and I wouldn't be so much of a growth guy.
I'm curious to know when you were investing in all the, the writing and the conferences, was your wife
Yeah,
by your side? Was she whispering in your ear like, "Hey, maybe you're spending a little bit too much here, a little bit too much there"?
we were comfortable. We didn't have kids. I did well. She did well. We went on every weekend. We went out to eat and all that stuff. So it wasn't like an issue. I was still investing and everything like that. It just added up, you know.
Sure.
Books you could write off, or it's like a website I'm going to take on, or I'm going to go do this thing and stuff like that. Yeah, the tools back then, it was just a lot more expensive to do certain things. And I tried financial coaching and stuff like that. And nowadays, it's just so much cheaper and easier. Like, throw up a book on Kindle or something like that. So it was more of just like, but here's the thing. I'm glad I did it because I don't want to be 80, 90 years old in a rocking chair thinking back of like I could have, would have, should have, you know. And I even had a little bit of a blip. I was out of work for a bit during COVID and discovered X, and I wrote this book partially. It was like, oh, let me put it out there. But I'm not actively promoting it. I'm not doing that type of thing just because I don't need to. I scratched the itch. I wrote a pretty damn good book, if you will. I still haven't done the print version on Amazon. I will. It's just on Gumroad. But that's what I'm going to spend my time and effort doing. Coaching Little League, softball, helping out my daughter, like just doing the things that are fun in life. And that's what taking care of your finances affords you the ability to do. I don't need to have a second career or something like that unless I want to.
Sure. I love that you answered that because I wanted to ask you just a little bit about the millionaire lifestyle and what it really affords you to do. And not so much, I think everyone, all of us, if you will, who aren't yet at that millionaire status, I think we have these
Hmm.
dreams of buying the fast cars, the big houses, the boats, the this, the that. And
Yeah.
really, it's the millionaire next door. You get a car that I think you said 15 years old.
Yeah.
You're out there coaching little league, and to me that makes you a billionaire, really, right?
Yeah.
It's the experiences, but I want
Time.
to get just your 2 cents on that.
Yeah, for me, it literally is straight from the book, The Millionaire Next Door, and you realize that like these folks now that book didn't get into like how happy they were and like oh people look at them like oh you're cheap or something like that. Live a little like my buddy jokes, my brother-in-law like loosen the purse strings or something like that. But I'm like I'm happy like I don't need much. I love coffee, running, like my sneakers, reading. My kids. I'm like Charlie Munger, buried in a book. Like that's what they're gonna remember about me. Pretty happy. We go nicer vacations now. The kids are a little older. It's easier to manage. 2 vacations this year. But I still watch that type of thing. I'm not retired. I'm trying not to pull out of the assets too much, and I'm happy. Like I don't need a yacht. I don't need I can fly coach. I'm not a big guy. Like I could fit in coach. So it's things like that. And like the car, like the new car smell wears off. You're in the car driving. Like you can't see the outside. Like you can't be like, oh, look at my Beamer. Like you just see the emblem, like, and I'm kind of joking about it. And I've heard like my first million is like one of my favorite podcasts. And like they talk about it too. It's like there's levels. Like, okay, so if you reach past 10 million, maybe that changes it. There, Sam Parr is interviewing some folks, and it's like, okay, now it's like, okay, from 10, I thought it'd be set, but then I was pushing for 20. And then I bought a jet, which was stupid, and all this other stuff. And they're like, okay, what do you enjoy doing? And it's like the simplest things that don't cost a lot. And so and I'll stop ranting in a sec, but just read the 4 hour work week. It's the beginning where he's talking about lifestyle design and like just rent the lifestyle. Like if you think you need a Lamborghini, just rent it for a day, drive it around. Then you're like, oh, do I really want to worry about that and all this other stuff? And then I got to upkeep and the insurance and everything like that. I can just rent it. You can Airbnb it. You can Airbnb a mansion if you want. You could rent a great vacation spot. So you can rent that lifestyle and then your assets are still growing and compounding. And, the cool thing at reaching a level is when your assets are making more than your income on an annual basis. Like that's cool. Like that's just like wow. And there's like all these milestones. I was the 100K, first 100K was the biggest bitch as Charlie Munger says. Sorry, I don't know if we're allowed to curse. That was huge for me. And that unlocked, like, I am on the right path. What I set out to do a couple of years ago is working. I'm just going to keep working. I'm just going to ignore everybody else. My buddies that started investing with me back then, none of them are as obsessed as I am with this stuff. They've just gone on and done their other thing. And that's okay. This is my thing, and this is what I do. I don't force it on anybody. I might force it on my kids. Like, hey, there's this Roth thing that you might want to, that babysitting money, park it in. So that's coming for sure. One cool thing, I just say what I did. I had a job. I joined it. They give you free lunch. So what I did instead was I took that money that I would have been spending on lunch and I split it between my two kids and I invested it. I said, what stock do you want to pick? And so they picked a lucky pick at that time, and it's grown. And I did it for just 3 years. I'm still putting the money in, but I won't tell them how much is in it. And it's just cool. Like, that's the story. Daddy took his lunch money, put it aside every single month, invested it in these stocks, reinvested the dividends. This is the dollar amount. Done. And then it'll be the Roth, and it'll be these little lessons that you pass along to your kids or to your listeners or to other people and be like, oh, that's kind of cool. I think I'll do that. It's the whole coffee a day thing, like David Bach and like that thing. I'm like, I enjoy my Starbucks and Dunkin' Donuts. I'll just indulge when I need to, but most of the time I'm making coffee at home. Doesn't make me a cheap person. It just makes me like, no, it's pretty free.
Powerful answer. My last question for you, Fabio, is one of my favorite ones to ask every master of the market who joins me here, and I'm very curious to know where you're going to go with it. If I were to give you right now $10,000 to invest in just one stock, what stock would it be and why?
Man, that's a tough one. It's like, because then I'm like, oh, is it dividend stock? Is it a growth stock? That type of thing. Um, oh, God, I don't know. I would probably, I'm going to give you a bad answer. I'll do a leverage stock fund, like just like totally antithesis to anything I've ever said or anything like that. Probably because over the long term, it has the biggest opportunity to grow. Like, just to put that 10,000, not like a coffee can portfolio, and just put it into one stock, etc. And that's mainly because most of my plays, like, I'm still trying to evaluate some of them and how they'll turn out, for the long term. But yeah, I probably would just do that. So anybody in the comments, just make fun of me. You can at me at Twitter and or X and just say, like, you're the dumbest investor ever. That was like the worst answer anyway. But for me, it's just like, I'm going to invest in the market. So either it's a regular boring QQQ, SPY, that type of thing, and see how it plays out. Just because Buffett took that, exact same bet and beat the hedge funds, et cetera, because it's hard to pick a stock, just one. And that's why when I tell people to invest, I'm like, pick 10, put a little into 10, and then you have better odds. It's not like 50, like we were talking earlier, like you went through a 35. Just pick those, concentrate, and then you go, okay, no, that one's not good. I'm going to double down on that one as they perform. Because in a moment of time, like an open AI might be susceptible. Google might get their act together, or Facebook, or someone else, Meta. You never know, like an N of one. But there's a number of stocks I like. I'm going to pick the boring answer because I hope people follow me, and not the leverage stock. That was kind of a joke. But just an SPY, QQQ. There's others out there. Probably the safest bet if you only had the opportunity to invest in one thing.
Investors, Fabio Marciano on with us. Fabio, what's your Twitter handle? Where can we find you on Twitter, or I should say X now?
Sure. I'm not on there as much. I've been focused on family, fitness, and fun. But it's F Marciano, so F, and then my Marciano. If you at me or DM me, I'll do my best to respond. But most days I'm spending time with either at work, working out, or with the family.
Fabio, I want to thank you for joining us on Masters of the Market. Your X handle will be in the description. Likewise, with the books that you've authored, it's been a real pleasure. A lot of insights offered for all of us. And until next time, investors, we will see you all there.